creatures of our God and King, and every mountain, every valley, everything. Oh, and every good word, every song we could sing. You make everything. You make everything beautiful.
Well, good morning, NorthPoint. We have started this series on art and beauty, and if you haven't got a chance to visit the art gallery in the foyer, make sure you take some time to do that. We got some treats for you after the service today, so it'll be a good time to take some of those and check out the art that's there. And then on Wednesday night, we have these art classes beginning this week, where for 8 weeks we're going to talk about everything from writing to interior design to landscape design. This week we start off with food, and I can guarantee you this, it's going to taste good if you come. So I would love to see you there. You can register for those online, and hopefully you'll take advantage of those happening over the next couple of months. Now, I know that a lot of you, you're getting into this series, and you're letting me know about that because I got lots of like, Jeremy, you got to check this out. Did you see this? Have you listened to this? Click this link, all of that kind of stuff, and I love it. I think that's really great. Michelle and I went over to somebody's house for lunch this past week, and I do think the wife was slightly apprehensive about the meal that she was serving us, because she's like, I hope this is presented beautifully enough for you. And it was. It looked really good, and it tasted really good. It was wonderful. I do hope that this series gets us thinking and talking about beauty, about the arts, about this thing that's inside of all of us. That's what we saw last week, right? When we began this and we went back to Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, the big thing we saw was this, is that we are all creators of beauty. When God made this world and he decided to make human beings, he did something distinct in them from all the other parts of his creation. He put his image inside of us. And that means a lot of things, but at the least it means that we represent God on this earth. He says, now rule over the creation that I've made. You're the top of the ladder here, but I'm putting my image inside of you. What is God's image? At the least, we know that God's image is that he is a creating God, because that's what we see in Genesis 1 and 2. He's creating all sorts of things. And then when he makes us and puts his image in us, he's saying, be co-creators with me. That's at least what it means to be in the image of God. That we have inside of us both this longing for beauty, an eye for beauty, a desire for beauty, and an ability to create beautiful things because we're made in his image. Now, for some of you, that longing that's inside of you, the appreciation, the ability to create beautiful things, it comes out in like the classic art forms. You know, things like writing or poetry or music or architecture or something like that, and you get it. But others of you are like, no way, man, that is not me. All those classical forms, like, I'm not going to Hamilton. I'm not about to sign up for a pottery class. I'm not writing love sonnets to someone. Like, that just isn't me. Any of you in here and you can't draw a lick, go ahead and raise your hands. Like, you're terrible at painting or drawing. Yeah, that's me. Maybe you go out and you look at these paintings and you're like me, and you're like, I appreciate it all the more because I can't even draw stick figures. Like, if I try to draw stick figures, you'd be like, what is that? Like, it's just, I don't know what it is, right? Maybe that's you. And so you're like, no, I just don't really identify with those things. Maybe you're a little bit more skeptical of this whole thing. And in your life in general, you've been like, I'm not really like an artsy person of beauty. I don't care about that kind of stuff. For some of you, to be honest, you're guys, right? You're dudes. And you're just like, oh, if we were talking about trucks and hunting and CrossFit, then I'm in with that. But I don't know about this series we're doing. It's kind of frou-frou. And Jeremy, that shirt that you wore last week, that looks a little, I don't know about that. So like that's weird, man. You're not into it. You're skeptical about it, right? You know why, though, I think you might be skeptical about it? I think it's because of this. I think it's because we haven't thought enough about beauty and we've thought too narrowly about it. We haven't thought enough about it and we've thought too narrowly about it. Now, I could say you haven't thought enough about it and put it all on you, like it's all your fault and make you feel guilty for not thinking about it more. But I said we on purpose, and I'm saying we because I feel like as the church of Jesus, we haven't thought enough about it together, about beauty. We haven't said, look, this is what God says about it. This is where beauty and the arts come from. This is how God formed it and shaped it from the beginning. And this is practically what it looks like worked out in our lives. And so what many Christians have done is they just sort of put the arts into the secular category. It's not really in a spiritual category. And I know it's got to be in that secular category because there's a lot of art that is wrong or sinful. Right? Like, you know that's true. You've watched a movie before, right? And you're like, I don't think God is happy that I'm watching this right now, or I should probably turn it off. Or you see some certain fashion trends, and you're like, I'm not sure God's like approving of that fashion trend right now. There's certain music. You ever listen to a song with lyrics, and you're like, I don't think Jesus likes these words that are being said right now, right? We know that's true. And so since that's the case, then we just lump all art into that category, and we're like, it must all be wrong. It's just in the secular realm. God doesn't really have much to say about it except for he probably doesn't like it for the most part, right? And so we avoid it and we stay away from it. We're skeptical about it. And then in the church, I just don't know that we've been taught about it very much. Like, when is the last time you heard a series or even one message on beauty and the arts? Probably not very often. We just haven't been taught or spent a lot of time to say, God, what do you say about this? And then, secondly, when we do think about the arts and beauty, I think we tend to think too narrowly about it. It's music, it's poetry, and it's paintings. It's just for artist types. But again, I'm a truck-driving, gun-wielding, beer-drinking man, right? So like, unless you're going to talk about mounting that deer that I just shot or football, there's some beauty in that. But other than that, I don't know about this too much. So here's what I want to do. I want to try and counter these things today, or at least just give it a start by thinking more about beauty and then by thinking more broadly about it. So let's talk about thinking more about beauty first. And we're going to do this from Exodus chapter 31. So if you got a Bible, take it and turn there. And the Bible's in front of you. It's on page 70. Now, we're going to be coming into the middle of what is the second book of the Bible, and we haven't spent a lot of time in this book, so I need to give you the context about where we're at, just jumping into the 30th chapter of this book. The context in Exodus is that the nation of Israel, God's chosen people, have been slaves in Egypt under Pharaoh, and God says, enough, I'm going to release my people from slavery. So he calls a guy by the name of Moses, and he sends them to be the deliverer of his people. His people are headed to the promised land, but on the way to the promised land in Israel, they're going to do a lot of travels. And God needs to do something with them. Primarily, he needs to make a covenant with them. That's what he does. And in this covenant, this agreement that God makes with them, he's saying to them, this is who I am. The God, the creator of the universe, my name is Yahweh. That's how I'm revealing myself to you. We're going to be in a covenant relationship with each other. Here's who I am. Here's who you are. And here's the parameters of our relationship and what that is going to look like. So in Exodus chapter 20, for instance, this is where we get the 10 Commandments, right? Where God lays out, here's the way that you should live. Here's your requirements. Along with that, God gives the people all sorts of direction about relationships, about how they should treat each other, about what justice looks like, about property laws, and about proper worship. Because again, if God is coming to this people and saying, I'm God, the creator of the universe, you're my people, I want a relationship with you, then part of that relationship is going to be worship. How do the people properly glorify, honor, worship, and relate to God? So in that instruction about worship, God says, here's how we're going to do this. I want you to set up a place of worship, a place where I will come down and my presence will dwell, a place where you can meet me. He calls it a tabernacle or a tent of meeting with the people. And at that place, that location, that tabernacle, people would offer sacrifices to atone for their sins. They would offer prayers to God. It's where they would come and they would worship and encounter God himself. So God gives the people in Exodus specific instructions about how this place of worship should be set up. He says, here's the dimension. Here's all the furniture that's going to be in there. Here's the layout. Here's the type of wood I want you to use. Here's the type of cloths I want you to use. In fact, in Exodus, we end up with almost 6 chapters full of blueprints before CAD was ever invented, blueprints for what this place of worship should be like. So this is really important to God. He gives a lot of information about it. The question, though, that we come to in Exodus chapter 31 is, who's going to build this place? Who has the resources and the capacity and the ability to put this ornate place of worship together where we can come and encounter God? That's what Exodus 31 answers. Check it out. Exodus 31 and verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur of the tribe of Judah. And I filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills, so that he can make artistic designs for working gold, silver, and bronze. So we can cut and set stones, so we can work in wood, so we engage in all kinds of crafts. Moreover, I've appointed Aholiab, son of Ahisamach of the tribe of Dan, to help him. Also, I've given ability to all the skilled workers, so they can make everything I've commanded you. And then he goes through and he tells us all the pieces of furniture: the tent of meeting, the ark of the covenant law with the atonement cover on it, and all the other furnishings of the tent, the table and its articles, the pure gold lampstand and all its accessories, an altar of incense, an altar of burnt offering and all its utensils, the basin with its stand, also the woven garments, sacred garments for Aaron the priest, and the garments for his sons when they serve as priest, and the anointing oil and fragrant incense for the holy place. They're to make them just as I commanded you. So look, after all of these detailed instructions about his place of worship, God says, and I'm sending my Spirit, the third person of the Trinity, into a man named Bezalel to fill him with my Spirit so that he'll have the ability to make all of this happen. Now, did you know this is the first time in the entire Bible where we ever read of somebody being filled with the Spirit of God? Like, if you're a follower of Jesus or you've been around the church for a while, you know, like, the Spirit of God's really, really important, right? And throughout the Bible, we read things about being indwelt by the Spirit, baptized in the Spirit, filled with the Spirit, guided by the Spirit. Don't quench the Spirit. Don't say no to the Spirit of God. The Spirit's really important. We just got done with Acts, our origin story as a church, where we come from. And you know how the church was born? It was born by the Spirit of God filling the followers of Jesus, where they spoke in languages they didn't know, proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ, doing miraculous signs, and 3,000 people believed Peter's message on that day, and the church was born. So the Spirit did that, right? Spirit's really, really important. Well, the very first time we encounter the Spirit of God filling somebody, like he would later do in the book of Acts, happens here with Bezalel. And who was it that was first filled with the Spirit of God? An artist. And what was he filled for? He was filled to make beautiful things. In fact, God sends his Spirit into Bezalel so that he says he would have, verse 3, wisdom, understanding, knowledge, and skill. That's pretty comprehensive. Because when God does something, he does it all the way, right? And so he says, this is really important to me, and I'm going to give the guy the ability in every conceivable area, and then he lays out all those areas, what he would be able to do, right? Wisdom, knowledge, understanding, skill, that's a comprehensive list. It's kind of like the Hy-Vee and Grimes, right? I've talked about this. I've given this shout out before. Have you been to the Hy-Vee and Grimes, right? If you go into the Hy-Vee and Grimes, it's like, I mean, you know, like you have a day at Adventureland or a day at a theme park or you could have a day at the Hy-Vee and Grimes, right? Because you go there and you can do all the things, right? All the things can happen there. You can pick up your prescription. You can buy a pair of sneakers. You can get an outfit for the fall. You can ride on a treadmill for a little while and take one of those home if you want to. You can eat your lunch while you're there. You used to be able to get your nails done there as well. You could get a movie to take home with you. Oh, yeah, and it's a grocery store, so you could buy groceries if you wanted to do that as well, right? All the things are there. And Bezalel gets all the things from God. What all of those words put together mean is this, that Bezalel had the mind, the heart, and the skill of an artist. The ability to make it happen. Head, heart, and hands of an artist. So that when God gave these blueprints, Bezalel in his mind, he's able to see them come to life. He uses his imagination to say, I see how we could put that together. And here's the resources we're going to need. Here's a problem we might encounter. We can handle it in this way. And then he had the skill, the hands to make that imagination and the blueprints from God come to life. In addition to all that ability that God gave to Bezalel, he gave him a talented assistant. And did you notice also many skilled workers, skilled artists to help him bring these things about? Now, I imagine that as Bezalel and his team are working on the tabernacle and all of these items, that they're working off the specific instructions God gave them, but also they're able to use their own artistic imagination to actually put it into practice, right? And so if we would read back on those 6 chapters, we would see that God did give pretty specific dimensions and layout for each of these things. For instance, one of the things that he's supposed to create and make is for what was called the Ark of the Covenant, where the 10 Commandments would dwell, and the stone tablets and some other artifacts from Israel's history would be in there. On top of that was called an atonement cover. And so when God says, I want you to make this atonement cover, the top of the Ark of the Covenant, I want you to make it out of pure gold. I want there to be 2 angels, 2 cherubs that are facing each other together, looking towards the Ark of the Covenant with their wings spread out and touching each other. So that's pretty specific direction from God. Here's one rendition of what the Ark might have looked like. You know, something, you've seen a picture of this before, something like this, right? Now look at that. So God gives the direction on what it should look like. But you notice even looking at this picture, that Bezalel would have had a lot of artistic freedom to design the wings of the angel the way that he imagined them to be, to put the lines and the contours on there. What does the face of a cherub look like? I don't know if Bezalel actually ever saw an angel or not, but God put in him the ability to imagine what that would look like and then to craft it and to shape it and to work with this material to bring this thing about, which is exactly what we saw last week, right? God creates us to recreate. God creates us to recreate with him. He gives guidance and he gives direction, and then he gives us the ability to bring those things about. In fact, in his place of worship, he calls Bezalel to create, get this, an ornate place of beauty. It was lavish. Do you see how God here values design and order and beauty? How he wants to develop a place of incredible beauty? How he gives instructions and then abilities to make sure that happens? And how he uses us as human artists to bring that work about. Think about this with me for a second. What God is doing here and calling for in the development of this temple, it is not practical, it is not efficient, and it is not frugal. It is really none of those things. The people just came out of slavery, right? That's the context. They are slaves for years and years in Egypt. God finally delivers them, takes them out into a desert, and he says, now here in the midst of this desert, I want you to make me this ornate place of beauty where you will worship me. It doesn't make sense. They didn't have a wood shop. They don't have all of the resources that they need there that are right with them. They had some things. I mean, when they left Egypt, the Egyptians did give them a bunch of silver and gold and were like, get out of here, we never want to see you again, right? So they had some of that stuff, but a lot of the raw material, they would have to figure that out. They're wandering around in the desert. There is no Egyptian IKEA that they can go to get some of this stuff. They got to figure out where we're going to find this stuff at. It is not practical. It's not efficient. It is not frugal at all. So in the midst of that, God says, I know you're just trying to find food to eat, but let's do a building program, right? Let's do this. This is really important to me. So think of something crazy for a second. I want you to imagine that you are with your family, and you've got to be with your family for a period of time, living out of a sleeper van, okay? So let's add some more people to your family so you at least have 7. That's a great number for a family. So there you go. You got at least 7 of you in your family living out of a sleeper van, and your job is to build an IKEA store from scratch, from the ground up. You got to build the building. You got to set up all the rooms. You've got to put together Billy bookshelves and Hemnish dressers. You've got to weave rugs. You got to find the yarn and the cloths to be able to weave the rugs and put all those together, set up all the rooms, have the furniture for people to buy. That's your job. Something like that is what God is telling the children of Israel to do here, right? It's not practical. It's not efficient. It is not frugal. And it doesn't really make sense when they're just trying to find food to eat and water to drink that they would spend their time on something so immense like this. And so here's what we see. The creation of the tabernacle, it wasn't practical, efficient, or frugal, but it was beautiful. It was beautiful, which says something about the importance that God places on beauty. It's just what he wanted. And it's just what he wanted because this temple, it looked like God. It pointed to him. It gave people access to him. It was a project of co-creation with God that expressed unspeakable beauty. Because apparently God values beauty. And he values the artists that bring it to life. You know, God could have just said, let's just throw up a tent and call it good, right? Couldn't he do that? I mean, he's God. He's present everywhere. The big thing is his presence, right? Do we need all this other ornate stuff to go along with it? Just throw up a tent. We'll be good with that. Maybe think a little bit about forts, like when you were a kid, or your kids or your grandkids. Your kids or grandkids, or maybe your younger siblings ever say to you, hey, could we do a fort in the basement? Will you please set up a fort for me? If you've ever had to do that, what kind of fort parent are you? You know what I mean? Like, are you like, all right, gather all the blankets, gather all the sheets, gather all the Afghans, get some of the chairs from the living room or the dining room, right, so we can set up pillars all around here, and we're going to turn the entire basement into one massive fort. This is going to be amazing. Is that you? Or are you the parent that's like, grab a top sheet from the closet and we're going to call it good? That's it. That's what God could have done. Grab a top sheet from the closet and call it good. I'll be there. Everything's going to be okay. But that's not what he did. God said, no, I want a specially designed table over here. And I want a special altar that's right here. And I want to put another altar here. And I want a gold lampstand. Not out of common, ordinary materials, a gold lampstand that will always burn and show you my light. And I want an Ark of the Covenant. And I want an ornate top to go over this. This is how I want it to be designed. And I want there to be incense that's always burning so that people could smell. There's a particular smell we want to be in here. I want my people to hear, see, smell, and touch my presence. I want a full sensory experience of my beauty. Because beauty like this always leads us to the source. That's what's going on here. The temple, it wasn't practical, efficient, or frugal, but it was beautiful because beauty like this always leads us to the source of beauty. Do you know that's the function of beauty? Beauty emanates from God. It comes from Him. It expresses God to us. It shows us who He is, and it always leads us back to Him. It always points back to Him, the creator of beauty. So all these elaborate plans, the furnishing, the decor of the tabernacle, they were for worship, for us to see and experience God. Now, we don't worship in a tabernacle anymore, quite like the people of Israel did. And that tabernacle eventually would become an even more, much more elaborate temple, right? We don't worship in that place anymore. But we use things of beauty. We use art all the time, right? This stage, the design of the stage, the lights, the screens, the graphic arts that are put up on there, and oftentimes videos and stories and images that are placed there. The cross that is here. The bread and the cup of communion. They help us to see, to know, and to worship the God of beauty. In fact, did you know that they do something in us that words alone cannot do? Tim Keller says it this way. He says, we need artists and we need art because we can't understand truth without art. We can't understand truth without art? Tim, I know you're an author and a well-respected leader, but that's like a bold statement. Are you sure we can't understand truth without art? I think that's true. I think Keller is right. Think about it this way. Why else would God use all this ornate furniture and costly resources to develop this place of worship for the people when they're just trying to survive in the desert? Why would Jesus, when He comes down to this earth as God in the flesh, mostly teach us truth through parables, stories, object lessons, and images? Why, when Abraham, who was to be the father of the nation of Israel, Abraham who existed before Exodus and before Moses, before the nation came to be this great number of people, Abraham who was the first Israelite that God called, this pagan guy who didn't even know God and said, I want you to go to a land, just get going and I'll show you where it's going to be, and I'm going to make of you a great nation. But Abraham, who followed God and did that thing and then spent years and years and years with not one offspring to his name, not one son, he's approaching 100 years of age. His wife is approaching 90 years of age. Later on, we'll read about in the story of Hebrews, this is terrible, but the writer of Hebrews says, and Abraham, with his wife as good as dead, he says, right, her womb is barren, she's not, you want to have a baby when you're 90 years old, right? Like that's where he's at. And Abraham's like, God, I don't think you're going to make a great nation out of me. I don't have one son. He's doubting God. He's like, I don't think this is going to happen. And what does God do to speak to Abraham? He says, Abraham, go outside and look at the stars. Right? In Genesis chapter 15 and verse 5, we read this. When Abraham is in a season of great doubt, God takes him outside and He says, look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have. God could have said to Abraham, hey, shut up, Buster. After all, I'm God and I'm speaking to you right now. Most people don't even get that. You are talking to God right now. And since you're talking to God, who is just a spirit, doesn't have a body, God the Father, right? I mean, you should know that I'm going to do whatever I want to do, and it's going to happen. But He doesn't do that to Abraham. Instead, God showed Abraham something of immense beauty to make a point because Abraham needed art. He needed beauty so that the truth would make sense to him, to help him not only hear but to see and to feel something inside of him in a way that mere words just wouldn't do. And the story goes on to tell us that Abraham believed God when he saw the stars. That's the power of art. That's the power of beauty. It helps move us to understand in a way that words or simple explanations just can't muster. You think about it in your own life. Haven't you been struck before by the vastness of the universe by looking up at the stars at night? Or taken in the immense beauty and massiveness of the Grand Canyon, saying, how did this all come about? Or maybe by observing the flight of a simple creature like a hummingbird. If you're like me, I'm still amazed by the hummingbird. A couple of weeks ago, I was sitting at our dining room table and I looked out and I hadn't seen him before. We got some flower boxes on our deck and this, like one of the smallest hummingbirds I have ever seen is just there with its wings going, whatever they go, like 110 miles an hour or something like that, right? And just flying and getting the pollen out of there, doing whatever they do with their, I'm just like, it's amazing, right? And when you see those kinds of things, don't they teach you something? Aren't they saying something to you about yourself, about God, about the way the world works? When I think about Abraham's story here, it's hard not to think about Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night painting. You've seen this painting before, right? I mean, it's maybe the most famous painting down to our day. This painting, Van Gogh painted in a style called Post-Impressionism, and Post-Impressionism was known by like these thick brushstrokes and very vivid colors and distorted forms to give an expressive effect. So when you look at this painting, it's less real in one sense. Like you've never actually seen a landscape that looks like this, right? You're like, okay, that's not exactly real, right? That would be realism. It's not exactly that. And yet in another sense, it's actually more real. Because what Van Gogh was trying to do in Impressionism is impress something upon you, right? Make you feel something, make you sense something. So as you look out at this landscape, you see the sky it's swirling, it's moving. And you've had that sensation sometimes when you've looked out at the stars at night, you're like, is this moving? Am I moving? There's a bigness to it. There's a vastness to it. You see that your place and where you're at. He put the church, if you see at the bottom part of the painting where we live on the horizontal plane, it's much more kind of solid forms and it gets more dreamlike as you look up. But there at the center is a church with a spire pointing up to God, right? Van Gogh's trying to tell us something in this painting. And imagine that Abraham, when he looked out at the sky that night, he saw and he felt something like this. And he believed in the God who made the millions of stars that he could not count. Nature made truth come to life. Art made truth come to life. And it makes truth come to life in many, many different forms. That's our second thing today. We've thought a little bit about beauty, a little bit about the value of it and the value God places on it and the point of beauty, how it teaches us truth. Let's briefly think a little bit more broadly about art and beauty. We've pushed on this quite a bit in the first couple of messages to try to expand our minds beyond the typical forms of art. You know, those typical forms being things like music and literature and painting. And certainly those are key artistic forms. But there are also many other forms of art and beauty. So many other ways of appreciating and creating beauty. So look again at Exodus chapter 31, and let's kind of make a list of these things. You see it even here. And first of all, Bezalel is filled with the Spirit of God in all those ways. Look at this, verse 4. To make artistic designs first for work in gold, silver, and bronze. That's metalworking. To cut and set stones, stonemasonry. To work in wood, that's woodworking. To engage in all kinds of crafts, that's crafting. And then he talks about his assistant Aholiab and all the skilled workers who are going to help him put together, look at the end of verse 7, the furnishings of the tent, the table and its articles, that's carpentry. And then the gold lampstand and its accessories, an altar of incense, an altar of burnt offering, and its utensils, the basin with its stand, that's decor. And also the woven garments and the sacred garments, that's clothing. Jump down to verse 11, and the anointing oil and fragrant incense, that's perfumers that are there, right? And so look at this list even we just get from one passage of Scripture. We have metalworking, stonemasonry, woodworking, crafting, carpentry, decor, clothing, and perfumers. That's a pretty broad list. And it's like God is saying, use every possible skill, every possible art form out there to design this place of worship for me and bring me glory through it. I'm going to show you who I am through all these things. Now, if we would read the rest of the Bible and think down to our day, we could add to this list quite a few other things, right? We could add things like this, like music and literature and painting and photography and graphic arts and jewelry and interior design and landscape design and fashion and sports and food and quilting and fingernails. I do have 5 daughters, right? And so the fingernails are a big deal. The dip, the shellac, the bejeweled things, the Freddy Krueger nails. You know what I'm talking about? Like the really pointy long ones. Have you seen some people with these? They're cool, man. It's an art form. Farming, beekeeping, organizing stuff, right? We saw that in Genesis. Sometimes there's forms of art that even hit you out of nowhere, like when you least expect it, and they kind of expand your horizons about things that are beautiful, things that are at least interesting and ornate. I've told you before that I like to cook a little bit. In our family, Michelle does most of the cooking. She's really good at it, but she also is our baker, right? She bakes stuff. I don't bake much. One thing that I make is peanut butter cookies. That's about it. But one time I saw this recipe for a blueberry cheese bread, and it looked good. I was like, I'm going to make that. So I made this blueberry cheese bread, and when I was cutting it and slicing it, this is what came out. Check that guy out. It was like a dude was looking back at me after I cut this piece of blueberry cheese bread, and when I thought of this, I thought about a classic painting, The Scream. You've seen this, right? The dude appeared to me. I don't know what he's trying to tell me, but he was there. Right? And so crazy, weird things like that happen sometimes, which you can actually add another art form, which would be humor. Humor is a form of art, which for some of you, you're probably like, yes, Jeremy, finally. This whole time, I've not identified with everything, but one of my love languages is sarcasm. So if we could throw that on the list, I'm starting to feel you now. This series will make sense to me. I don't know, but it is. Humor is a part of that. In fact, I got to share one other great thing with you. Somebody this last week, after we talked about Beethoven last week, they sent me this tweet. They said, this is so appropriate. Somebody put this out. It was about Beethoven, and it's about Beethoven's later years. And it says this: in the years after Napoleon's rise and fall as Emperor of France, Beethoven was in a flurry of musical writing. Being dead did not stop him in the slightest from recovering quickly and going on with his music. Sure, it was much harder, but he got through it. Yeah. That is amazing. That's like a miracle. It must be the Spirit of God bringing, I don't know. Deaf, of course, is what it was supposed to say, but that's great. You should laugh at those things. You should see those things. You should laugh with other people. Now, look, here's the thing. You don't have a desire or an ability for all of these forms of art. I don't know that there's any Bezalels around anymore. That was a special time. That was for a very special thing that God put his Spirit inside of Bezalel with all of those forms of art. But you have an ability and a longing in something. And just like the artistic expressions in the tabernacle, you can use the ability God's given you to partner with God in creating beauty. Remember, beauty emanates from him. It expresses who he is, and it always points us back to him. You really can't enjoy and cultivate beauty without being led back to the source. You know that, right? This is the trouble for the atheist. This is the difficulty of someone that says, I don't believe God exists or I don't know if he exists. When they see something of beauty, they don't exactly know what to do with it. G.K. Chesterton, he said it this way. He says, the worst moment for an atheist is when they feel really thankful and they have no one to thank. Where does that thing come from? Because you know, if you go out into our foyer right now and you look at all the pieces of art that are on the wall, you intuitively know that some human being created that. Some human being put those pieces of art together. But here's the question: where did those human beings come from? And where did the ability to create such beautiful works of art come from? They came from a source. They came from the source of true beauty, God himself, because beauty always points back to our Creator. So look, I hope in all of this you will see that cultivating beauty and artistic forms is worth your time. Exploring beauty, exploring the arts, making your artistic contribution, God made you for that. So plant flowers. Stop and enjoy a sunset. Write down those song lyrics that have been stirring around in your head. Organize your garage. Decorate your home. Invite people over for a great meal. Enjoy laughter. Take pictures. Paint. Quilt. Write. Work with wood. It's a part of who you are, and it's a part of how God made you to be a creator of beauty with him in all of its forms. What's your form? What's your artistic expression? It's maybe something for you to explore a little bit more. Maybe something for you to spend some time on. And maybe today, maybe being practical, efficient, and frugal isn't always the answer. Maybe it's not always best. Maybe one thing that God really values beauty, it sometimes pushes against what's practical, efficient, and frugal. And maybe that's okay. I'd tell you an area for me where I've wrestled with this over the years has to do with a landscape design, like our house, outside of our house, and probably inside of our house too. And it's always like, how much money do you spend on that? How much time do you spend on that? You know, I would love to drop $100,000 on it, like every season. I love that. I would love to do that. Doesn't seem like I should probably spend, and I don't have $100,000 to spend on it either. It doesn't seem like I should do that. But the way that God values beauty, it does seem like I should do something with that, especially if God's put that desire inside of me and inside of Michelle to do some beautiful things with that. So there's a play there, right? There's a struggle, and you have that struggle too, like how much. I think what we often default to is what's practical, efficient, and frugal. That's what we're supposed to do, right? And I would just say to you, maybe today you need to get another category that God values, which is, but what's beautiful? And beauty probably, again, for me, it doesn't mean $100,000 into that. It probably doesn't even mean $10,000 every season, I don't know, for us, but it means something because beauty is something that God greatly, greatly values. For some of you, maybe this means that God just wants you to see what you are doing. Your art, your skill, your interest is beautiful, that it's worth it, that it's spiritual. And so maybe that thing that you thought, well, that's secular, I don't know what God has to say about it, maybe slide it over into the spiritual category. No, God does have a lot to say about it. He does value it. And he values it because he values you, and because he values beauty, and because beauty always points back to him, the source of true beauty. So bring your fishing hobby, bring your design aspect, bring your love of food, your fashion sense, your organizing compulsion, under the spiritual category. Let God shape it and form it for you. Let him teach you about it. See the value he places on it, and let him show you how to enjoy it and use it to worship him. Would you pray with me?